Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Juan's World. And I know I promised on Friday that I would try to do some cooking, and I did go to my favorite Australian supermarket on Sunday and got some nice meats, including a buffalo roast, a nice duck breast, and some really jumbo shrimp. And they're all in the freezer because I had a lot of things left over. I've been making some pies. I made a fish pie this morning, which I've done before. There's the mashed potato and different kinds of fish all mixed together with some boiled eggs. So I thought I would talk a little bit today about politics. Now, not partisan politics, I'm not going to do that. I want to talk about elections, and in particular polling prior to elections, because it's a fascinating subject. So let's get into it. Now, probably, I don't know, 20 years ago or so, when I was a head of department at State University of New York, we had a debate right around election time between several political scientists at my university. And I was asked to be the moderator. Fine. It's not really a terribly cumbersome job. And we had a Q&A at the end, and of course most of the audience were going to be questioning the participants. But I had started the whole debate, discussion, whatever you could call it, with some general comments about polling. And one of the audience members said to me, I'm a scientist, okay, and I don't agree with your remarks about polling. Like polling has a margin of error of sometimes plus or minus 3 points, which means like 6 points in total, which is a pretty fair range when you're considering candidates that might have X% versus another candidate who has Y% something. And he went on and on about this. And I just sort of shrugged and said, yeah, polling is not an exact science. Thinking that, I'm dealing with like a particle physicist or an astrophysicist or something like that. And at the end, he admitted he's a physician. And I didn't say anything because I didn't want to like ruffle any feathers. But I thought, what are you talking about? You use a version of polling in medical research all the time. Call it statistical analysis, right? And there's a margin of error because you have a new drug and you give it to a certain number of people, and you give a placebo to a certain number of people to act as a control, and then you end up with a result. And the result says something like, there is a 35% chance that this medication will work with a margin of error of whatever. People don't understand statistics at all well, and he certainly didn't. And he wasn't a medical researcher anyway. He was a physician. He gets given certain medications, and they say this has X% chance of working, but it also has Y% chance of causing these side effects and blah blah blah, and you have to take all of that under advisement. I'm on a small amount of medication right now, which is controversial. I'm not going to get into all of that. But when you actually start reading the statistics, you have to be very careful, because people can read them in a misleading way. Now let's just take a hypothetical. Let's just say that drug A has a 0.05% chance of causing kidney damage. Like 0.05%, very, very small. And a competing drug has a 0.1% chance. I hope I'm doing this. I haven't written this down. Of causing kidney damage. But somebody can, write an article or go on YouTube or whatever and say, this drug is twice as likely to cause kidney damage as this drug. Well, neither of them have a very high chance of causing kidney damage. It's very low. 0.05 is, like ludicrously low. 0.1, that's 0.1%, as opposed to 1/5 of 1%. Very, very small. But it is true that the second drug is twice as likely to do it as the other drug. And so people say, oh, I'm not going to take that drug, it's twice as likely. Well, it's marginal. And that's how people just routinely misunderstand statistical analysis. And that's true of polling. But there's another aspect of polling, this is really what I want to talk about, is that polling can influence an election by virtue of its existence. And the best example I can think of is the 1970 election in the United Kingdom. And I was particularly attuned to that election because that was the first time that people who were 18 years old could vote. Up until that point, you had to be 21 to vote. 21 had been the age of majority for centuries. And I was kind of ticked off because both of my sisters, when they had turned 21, had big parties that my parents gave them, because that's a big deal. You are now at the age of majority, among other things, gives you the right to vote. Well, I guess it was in or around 1969 when the government changed the law so that 18-year-olds could vote, and so I could vote. I was 19, and really ticked off because it meant that I was not going to have a 21st birthday party because the age of majority had become 18 years old, and so I had suddenly become a legal adult, simply because of my age. I didn't even have an 18th birthday party, which I guess they do now. They said like 18 is now your age of majority. Well, when I turned 18, the age of majority was 21. But when I turned 19, they changed it to 18, so I didn't get a party at 18. I didn't get a party at 21 either. That's a rip-off. But what was interesting was that I was still in the sixth form in grammar school, and all of a sudden a lot of my friends were now eligible to vote, and we had conversations about who we're going to vote for and why and all that kind of thing, which was just like a sea change, to be in secondary school and talking about who you're going to vote for. And as it happens, that is the one and only time I've ever voted in an election anywhere. I'm quite adamantly apolitical for reasons which I'm not going to get into now. But that was kind of fun, to be able to go to the school or wherever it was that I was supposed to vote in, and cast my vote. And then that night, I sat by the television to watch the results come in. And Labour was in power at the time, and the polling had said that they had a 12-point lead over the Tories. So it was likely to be a landslide election for Labour under Harold Wilson, and the Tories were under Ted Heath. And so after the polls closed in England, there are a few constituencies that like to race to get their results in very quickly. And so I turned the television on fairly early on in the evening to see what was happening. And see, as the results come in, it doesn't really matter who wins so much as what the swing is. Like you could have a very safe Labour seat, and the Labour MP gets returned yet again. But that's not what's interesting. What's interesting is, what percentage of the vote went to Labour and what percentage went to the Tories. And if there's a swing of a significant percentage, let's say 5 or 6%, then it's notable, not for that constituency, because that constituency is a safe seat, but it's an indication of what's going to happen for seats that could go one way or the other, and then therefore making predictions about how the election's going to go in general. And so the first small constituencies started filtering in quite early on in the evening, and they had this I don't know if I could find an image of it now, but they had this thing called the swingometer, and it was a kind of arrow thing that was like 0 was in at the bottom, and then swing towards Labour was towards the left, and swing towards Tories was towards the right. And they wanted to have that swingometer there from the start, so that like the first constituency comes in, where is the swing? And the polls had put the swingometer at 12% to Labour, right? So that's what we expected, and I think it was actually centered at 0, but it could have been centered it could have been pointing to 12 based on the polls. So the first couple of constituencies come in, and they're not 12% towards Labour, they're 5% towards the Tories. And that continued to happen all night. And in the end, the Tories won 30 seats and a majority in the Houses of Parliament, where the polling had all indicated that Labour was going to have a safe return to power. Now, why did that happen? Well, subsequently, one analysis, I don't fully agree with it, but I agree with it in part. One analysis was that the voters were just tired of, because the Labour had been re-elected several times, and the polls had said 12%. So one of the theories was that just a lot of voters, and particularly Labour voters, had just stayed home. It's like why do I need to bother? They keep on being re-elected. They're going to get re-elected this time. 12 percentage points. That's huge. I'm not going to bother. And the Tories won. So that the indicator, which if we're talking about medicine or some other kind of statistical analysis, helps decide whether a certain course of action is good or not. In the case of political polling, it's very complicated, because the polling itself influences the way things work. And that's what's happening right now in the United States. Biden and Trump were pretty much in a statistical tie, so it was a toss-up for the presidency for the election in November. And Biden did the unthinkable. Like, he pulled out, you know, he could see, he could see two things going along. He could see that he wasn't, in any kind of dynamic sense, like appealing to the electorate, even though other statistics like inflation, crime, the stock market, all those things are positive for him. But people don't trust the polls. The statistics in that sense. They're more inclined to go with their gut based on what they see, and Biden's just old. He's a nice guy, but it's kind of like, do I really want my grandpa as president? And so the polling was kind of even, and so Biden said, well, that's bad news. I'm going to defer to a younger person, my VP, my Kamala Harris, and bow out. And the polls have immediately changed. What's going to happen in the future? Who knows? This is what one would also call a honeymoon period, where a new candidate, generates a lot of excitement. But this candidate is particularly unusual because it's a woman. She identifies as black or Indian Asian. Not a white man, which they've been used to for several hundred years. Obama broke the mold, and for all of his presidency, the strong negative against him was that he was black. And and so now we've got not just a black candidate, but a woman who also identifies as Asian. So there's all these things that are just seemingly against her. But a lot of people are saying, wow, well, this is different. This is a change. I can get into this. And we'll see. But the polling is still going to be important, because if she looks like she's starting to lag, then maybe more people will go out and knock on doors and men or women telephone banks and so on, and we'll see. It's a very curious interaction between statistics and reality. And of course, all statistical analysis is subject to error because you may not choose the right sample size. You may choose the wrong people to sample. You may ask the wrong question. And we very rarely see what questions they've asked. We get somebody saying, Kamala Harris is beating Trump by 5 points in Wisconsin or something like that. But what question did they ask? Did they ask, if the election were held today, who would you vote for? Or did they ask, who are you going to vote for in November? Or what? The difference in the question makes a difference. You could also have a preliminary question. Did you vote in the last election? Or do you typically vote in presidential elections? Also, there's all kinds of questions you can ask. And I almost never see that question coming up on the leaderboards when they're discussing who's polling in what way. So there's an awful lot about statistical analysis that we need to think more carefully about when we're assessing what people are telling us. And in terms of critical thinking as a whole, that's also true. You cannot just take at face value something that somebody tells you, like this drug works. I don't know, You know, Portugal is a nice place to retire. And you gotta ask questions. You've got to be a critical thinker, and that's has been my job all of my career, is to teach critical thinking, and that's part of what I'm doing here today. All right, that's enough for today. Please tell your friends, please like, please subscribe. And I won't promise, but I think I'll probably cook on Friday. I don't know right now. I'm kind of in the midst of a lot of writing that's taking up a lot of my time. But I love cooking anyway, so let's see. Have a good week.